The Bills might have a lot to figure out this season in a new regime, but I don't know about you Bills fans. To me, it sure feels nice heading into a season feeling like you're not going to get to the playoffs and Sean McDermott's going to find a new way to hold you back. The Bills have a brand new stadium, a brand new head coach, a whole new world of potential. So let's go, Buffalo. Maybe now we can see Josh Allen get that also elusive Super Bowl ring in Buffalo. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the reveal of the number 9 team in my preseason power rankings, as today we will take a deep dive into the relatively new look Buffalo Bills. For a legitimate Super Bowl contender, this team is actually tied for second in Super Bowl odds, believe it or not, despite being my 9th ranked team. But as far as, second in Super Bowl odds teams go, the Bills had a lot of turnover this offseason, which means we've got a lot to talk about here today. So let's not waste any more time and get started with this deep dive. If you could take just a second to hit that like button as we begin, I really appreciate it. And of course, if you enjoyed today's video, if you've enjoyed this series and for some reason you're not subscribed, please do hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my remaining deep dives as we lead up to the number 1 team in these power rankings. So let's go ahead and get started. In this series, we go through the entire roster and the coaching staff, and with every different segment, we take a look at this team's offseason changes and ask the question, did they get better, worse, or stay the same? And in the case of the Buffalo Bills, it is a big question as they do make the change at head coach that I certainly have been asking for about 2 or 3 years here in Buffalo, and it's been a slow process, I think, of getting a lot of Bills fans on my side with that, because to be fair, Sean McDermott deserves a ton of credit for coming in way back in 2017, really did do a good job of making the Bills feel like a real boy again, developing honestly a championship culture. This is a team that has believed they can win the Super Bowl over the last, better part of a half decade plus at this point. But I stand by everything I've said. I think McDermott kind of reached his ceiling as a head coach. He's just, some of the defensive background, someone that played kind of that bend don't break style, never really had the ability to get this defense to accelerate into being more of a championship caliber defense to support Josh Allen in the offense. And we saw them, ride the line tight way too many times in the playoffs. And as we know, that can easily go against you multiple times in a 4 or 5 year span. And we saw that here. So the goal is expand the ceiling of this team. We know they can play some offense here in Buffalo, but maybe can a Jim Leonhard take this from being a very solid high floor defense to more of an aggressive high ceiling defense, and a defense that I would say opponents have to fear a little bit more. Even if the Bills have always pushed kind of top 10 and all of your different metrics and stuff, ain't nobody has gotten to the playoffs and said, oh no, we got to play the Bills defense this year. They're hoping they can get a little bit more of that in Jim Leonhard. And another funny thing about the entire coaching staff change for the Bills is the old saying is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, in this case, what killed you makes you stronger, I think, as this is now a very, very Denver and Sean Payton inspired coaching staff, as this team did lose ultimately to the Broncos in the playoffs last year. Joe Brady himself has Sean Payton influence going back to his time in New Orleans. Jim Leonhard obviously comes over from Denver, and Pete Carmichael is the prominent Sean Payton disciple going all the way back to 2006. So we are talking about a very Sean Payton inspired staff here. But we do still have to answer that question. Is this an upgraded coaching staff with the new guys coming in? Not just that, but Bobby Babich, the de facto defensive coordinator, he is not retained. They also changed special teams coordinators with Chris Tabor out and Jeff Rodgers in. Ultimately, I did say, yes, upgraded here because Joe Brady stays. The offensive continuity is in place, and I don't hate bringing in another voice in the building in a Pete Carmichael. And then while Sean McDermott is a bit of a loss, mostly because of kind of the culture, professionalism he brought to this organization, I look at Jim Leonhard very likely as a better defensive mind at the end of the day, with more upside than what Sean McDermott had been bringing to the table here for far too long, honestly. And I think the kind of culture building work, the groundwork that Sean McDermott deserves credit for, that's not really going to go anywhere here. That's kind of been established here. So I'm really just not that worried about moving on from Sean McDermott. I definitely think it was well overdue here. But let's continue to break down this coaching staff here, and we'll start with Joe Brady now getting promoted as the head coach. Obviously, you're going to have some just kind of baseline questions about how does he do in the head coaching chair? Does it impact his play calling? Does he have the leadership qualities to keep this team confident? And if you go through a rough stretch, can he drag you through it? That's going to be anytime a guy is sitting in that chair for the first time, but I think he can handle it. I'm not necessarily worried about it, but it'll be something to, I guess, keep a bit of an eye on. But as far as Joe Brady as an offensive mind, I like Joe Brady a lot. And I know Bills fans have had their frustrations with Joe Brady because this offense has been rather capped from a approach and schematic standpoint. They have really not pushed the ball downfield. There have been a painful number of like third down screens in Buffalo. Feels like they've kind of punted on a lot of drives. That to me is going to be the biggest area of fascination with Joe Brady. And you pair that with what I said about, okay, how can he do as a head coach from a leadership standpoint? Joe Brady himself is a wild card for this team, but a wild card that I do believe in. But as far as, those concerns with the offensive play calling, I think it was some combination of, yes, Joe Brady could do a little bit of looking in the mirror and be a little bit more aggressive in those situations. So I can't take all of the responsibility off of Joe Brady for some of those frustrating moments. But I think number two is the reality that this team has not given him a vertical threat at wide receiver. And I don't think it's a coincidence that as soon as Joe Brady is in the head coaching chair and has more power in the organization, he's able to go to the GM and say, go get me DJ Moore. We need to push the ball downfield a little bit more. So I think that's a very positive sign there that things are going to change. And addition to that, I think having a defensive-minded head coach is going to lean a little bit more towards conservative mentality in some of those situations, playing for the field goal, not trying to put the ball in harm's way and, risk missing out on a field goal opportunity, So I think all of that blends together, and I'm less worried that this is going to be kind of that capped version of the Bills offense that we've seen. But what is crazy is even if you call it a capped offense in the sense of like most of the success that this offense has is through the ground and in the quick passing game, this has still been probably the most efficient, consistent offense in the NFL for the last 3 years. And you can specifically point to the moment that Joe Brady took over as the offensive coordinator in 2023 when this thing really figured itself out. So he's clearly done a phenomenal job here, even if there's some holes to poke in this offense, that you still want to see things expand a little bit. And that's, reflected in the offensive coach rankings that I give here. They are pushing top 10 for pass game coaching, 10th to 15th. And then the run game coaching is in a tier that ranks 7th to 13th. So no, we're not talking about elite offensive coaching under Joe Brady at this point in time. But we are talking about very high-end offensive coaching that maybe even has a bit of an up arrow in a sense on it because of, the idea that we talked about. They're going to try to open things up even further here. Now, just a little bit of talk about what the actual X's and O's and the scheme looks like in this Joe Brady offense. It is absolutely a Sean Payton-inspired offense. This does look quite similar to what Payton did in New Orleans, where Joe Brady was with him for a couple of years. And I would also say you've got some of that sort of Joe Burrow influence. Joe Brady was Joe Burrow's coordinator for that legendary LSU national championship team. And I would say the Bills offense models in many ways the Bengals offense under Joe Burrow as well. And what that offense is definitely a foundation of kind of spread philosophies where you can get in the gun, go 2x2, 3x1, get some quick passes in there, whether it is the screen game, air raid concepts such as mesh, any number of different quick hitting pass combinations where you can put that onto the plate of a smart quarterback capable of making quick decisions, that can distribute the ball quickly as almost an extension of your run game. That is kind of at the heart of what Sean Payton unlocked with Drew Brees in what at that time was kind of a modern pro spread style offense. But it's not just like flipping on a Oklahoma Sooners game. You're not just coming out in the gun, going 2x2, running bubble screens and mesh all day. They have plenty of pro-style philosophies in here as well. A lot of under-center run game that is extremely effective here. Heavy personnel stuff. The use of a fullback. Reggie Gilliam no longer here, but they've absolutely, gone power lead and counter and kind of a smash mouth north and south run game that is quite different from so many of the offenses around the league that live in that Shanahan-style system that really focus on outside zone and trying to find those explosives outside the tackles. It's not that they won't run toss and outside zone here. They certainly will, but they're more willing to punch you up the gut than we tend to see around the league. My last point here as well, and this also kind of ties into potentially talking about Joe Brady as maybe kind of an up arrow coordinator here. Depending on which route they want to go here, they totally have kind of flashed the willingness and certainly the ability to get into more like 12 and 13 personnel and lean into kind of the new modern meta that Sean McVay really opened up to the rest of the league this year with like 12 and even 13 personnel. I mean, you got 3 really good tight ends here, and I was honestly surprised that the Bills were 26th in the NFL in 12 personnel usage, and they were 16th in 13 personnel usage. So not like they never ran 13 personnel, but that's ranking 16th with 13 personnel, which is 3 tight ends on the field. That was only 4.6% of the time. For example, the Rams ran it, and granted, they were absurd with how much they wanted to do this, but 30.5% of the time, that is like 6 times more often than Buffalo ran it. And I think there's a ton of potential with everything they have here, not to mention the Josh Allen design run game that they've done a really good job with, his abilities there as well. I think there is so much untapped potential to triple those numbers in 13 personnel. And I think getting rid of the fullback in Reggie Gilliam probably alludes to doing that more often. It's not that they didn't run heavy personnel. Like I said, they wanted to beat you up front, but they were more of a fullback I formation type of offense. They actually led the NFL in 22 personnel at 13.3%. They were 10th in the NFL in 21 personnel. 22 personnel is going to be 2 tight ends, 2 backs, one of those backs being a fullback, and then 21 personnel is 2 backs, one being a fullback, and 1 tight end. So it's not that they didn't want to get into heavy personnel, but there is a difference between kind of when the fullback's out there as opposed to 13 personnel, because you have a guy like a Dalton Kincaid who can legitimately be an impactful wide receiver and really cause some formational problems when you come out in that 13 personnel look. Whereas a 22 personnel situation, teams are not going to be as afraid of like a Reggie Gilliam as that third big body, as a receiving threat. So I think letting Gilliam go, yeah, they did bring in like a Ben Van Sumeren to maybe make this team and still have the ability to get into I formation stuff. But that's something I'm really curious is like, are they going to, look at what the Rams did and be like, let's really lean into that. And you could get some really frustrating stuff to deal with us. I mean, especially with the design QB run stuff, because the Rams like took over the league by doing this last year offensively. And that was without any threat of a designed run quarterback in there. So a lot of potential for things to go even better here. And it's stuff that we haven't necessarily seen Joe Brady do well, like open up the vertical passing game, lean more heavily into the roster talent he has with that 13 personnel usage. It's a little bit of a hand-in-hand conversation where it's like, all right, should we be questioning why? Those things haven't shown up with Joe Brady quite yet. And that's kind of why we don't see Joe Brady show up as, a bona fide top 10, like high-end elite sort of offensive mind in my rankings here. But it's another hand to be like, I do kind of trust him that we're going to see more of that here. And it's definitely something to look for here in 2026. Now, we do also have to flip over and talk about the new look defense here under Jim Leonhard and just take everything you knew about a Sean McDermott defense, schematically speaking, which is a 4-2 base defense that basically just wants to sit in zone coverage, let you walk them back into the red zone, and hopefully don't give up a touchdown. Keep you to 3 points instead of 6. That sort of play on the back of your heels, prevent, mentality always just kind of left this Bills defense feeling soft and squishy and unintimidating to me when I watched them play as just a neutral observer. And I think opposing offenses probably felt the same way. Well, now just flip that upside down. You now are bringing in an attacking 3-4 style scheme with Jim Leonhard where you're going to blitz, you're going to press, you're going to go for it. Try to make the quarterback uncomfortable, try to generate turnovers, and really just replicate the style of defense that we've seen from Denver under Vance Joseph. And I think that's exciting, especially under the hands of a Jim Leonhard, who is a very highly respected mind around the NFL. He's been getting defensive coordinator interviews for years. He was kind of, I think, waiting for the right opportunity. He thinks this is it, and he should be quite high on people's, 2027 or maybe it's an extra year, 2028 head coach candidates lists. Maybe it does take a couple years because as we'll see in this video, there's a lot of roster turnover. This defense was built for a completely different system. It's going to be really hard to come in and just overnight, fix everything and get everybody to be the right fit. And I would encourage maybe some patience with Jim Leonhard in the first, half of this first season. It might even be, in the grand scheme of things, a one step back so that you can take 2 steps forwards approach with the Bills. Hopefully the offense, as they've done in the past, can continue to do the heavy lifting because at least on the positive end, it's like, all right, if you're going to take 1 step back with the defense, you can take 2 steps forward in the long run. It's not like you were winning the race anyway, right? Like this defense freaking sucked last year under Sean McDermott. It did. And they still, advanced in the playoffs because of what we know this offense is capable of. So at least you got that going for you here. But I mean, we saw that with Vance Joseph, right? Like, remember when he first stepped into Denver, Broncos fans wanted him fired halfway through that first season. They infamously gave up 70 points to the Dolphins. It took some time, especially in a defense that has a lot of moving pieces and, different fronts and that kind of 3-4 mentality. They want to run a lot of picks and stunts and stuff with their pass rush abilities up front. There's a lot of required communication on the back end of this with different zone coverages. And the other thing, too, is they want to be able to run man coverage as well, something that the Bills seldom did here. And they really didn't build this secondary to be able to play man coverage. Well, the Broncos, under Vance Joseph, Jim Leonhard, they ran the 4th most man coverage last year. Not just that, but the 7th most zero blitz. They want to be able to send 5 or 6 guys up front and feel comfortable leaving those defensive backs on an island. Well, we'll see how early he's going to be able to trust these guys to do that. Christian Benford wasn't asked to do that here. We frankly have no idea how good Maxwell Hairston's going to be. They drafted Davison Igbinosun in the 2nd round. They signed D. Alford in free agency. We'll see how well those guys are able to run man to man here, but I think that's all part of the picture where this could just take a little bit of, give him a little bit of slack, give him a little bit of time to figure this thing out. But I think this was the right hire, an exciting hire, and certainly a defense that once things start clicking here are going to force offenses to be more reactive to what you're doing on the defensive side of the ball instead of vice versa, and take the fight to the offense a little bit more. And I would be surprised if there's any Bills fans that don't get a little bit excited about the idea of that philosophy after all the years of passive and scared defensive play here. So I'm excited about the hire. Jim Leonhard he was a great defensive coordinator for the Broncos. He's been right underneath Vance Joseph. He's been an ascending mind. I have a lot of confidence that he can be someday even like one of these high-end defensive minds and a head coach in the NFL someday. Right now, still has some room to climb. Like, I have them ranked 18th to 22nd for pass defense coaching, 19th to 23rd for run defense coaching. He is a little bit of a crop ahead of some of these like really unproven defensive minds. I think there's a little bit more of a foundation and trust that he's going to come in and do a good job, but still certainly some to prove there as well. So I'm pretty excited about this Bills coaching staff with plenty to prove. Would love to hear some more thoughts from Bills fans in the comments down below. What'd you think of Joe Brady getting promoted as the head coach and Jim Leonhard coming in to execute a new style of defense here? But next up, we will begin diving into this Bills roster. Before we do that, though, I want to thank the sponsor for today's deep dive, and that is SeatGeek. Bills fans, if you haven't heard yet, you got a new stadium. That's pretty exciting. I hope you get a chance to go out and check it out. They do have one more preseason game remaining here on August 27th against the Steelers, or if you want to go catch a regular season game as well. I'm a big fan of outdoor football. That's definitely a team, a stadium, a fan base I am itching to go out and catch a game out there in Buffalo. But SeatGeek doesn't just have you Bills fans covered for that. They've got everybody covered. They're the official partner of the MLB, all the NFL action you can think of, or concerts, whatever it is. SeatGeek has it. They have the best app, the best user interface, where they will color code every single seat. So you just look for the green dots. You know you're getting the best bang for your buck, not just on the SeatGeek app, but market competitive prices as well. They'll show you images of exactly what those seats are going to look like. So if you've never sat in that section or never been to Highmark Stadium, which you probably haven't, you want to know what the view is going to look like, this is just a part of what makes SeatGeek the best ticketing app out there. Brand new stadium. They already have every vantage point rendered there for you. So if you're getting some tickets, use code TFG10. You will save up to $20 as well on that next purchase. Thank you again to SeatGeek. And let's get back to the Bills deep dive here. So as we begin our roster breakdown, we will talk about the quarterback room first. And we'll take a look at their offseason changes here, where Josh Allen's here. That's all you need to know, but they are changing backup quarterbacks. Mitch Trubisky heads to Tennessee, and Kyle Allen is in, but I said neutral at quarterback. But let's talk about Josh Allen. This is a bit of a what is there left to say type of conversation, though. I don't think too many people clicked on the Bills deep dive video to get a long discussion about Josh Allen, who I think at this point is pretty safely the best quarterback in the NFL. It's been an ongoing debate for years between him and Patrick Mahomes, and hey, maybe Mahomes takes the crown back this year. But with how Mahomes has played the last 2 years coming off an ACL, I think that debate is set to the side for now. Josh Allen continues to do it as well as anybody in the league. He caught some criticism for some turnovers in that Broncos playoff game, a playoff game that they were still only in because of his ability to elevate this offense that just hasn't had great pass catchers in a very long time, since about 2 years ago when they decided to move on from Stephon Diggs. And yes, the offense has shrunken in scale, as we talked about, a lack of a vertical passing game, though we know Josh Allen is more than capable of executing upon that kind of stuff when he's got the right wide receivers. Despite the offense shrinking, Josh Allen has continued to sustain this as, again, probably the most efficient high-end offense spread out over the last 2.5 years since Joe Brady took over the play calling duties here. And that's just a testament to his skill. I think the way he's evolved from a processing and decision-making standpoint, which was always something that needed to develop for him, but the way he can quickly identify throwing windows, distribute the ball, pick apart zone coverages, take the underneath stuff, not get bored with it. That's impressive. The accuracy, all the work he's done. We got a cool look at that in Hard Knocks last year, just going from someone that coming out of Wyoming, and I loved him coming out, but man, he sprayed some footballs coming out, and he has just reined that in, become, I wouldn't say he's the most accurate passer in the NFL, but top 10 to play it safe. Like, his accuracy is not a concern for him. It's more of a strength than it is a weakness. And then what he brings to the table in the design run game as well. Only Jackson Dart last season had more runs on designed carries last season. I think the Bills have been pretty smart about it too, where they don't bash him into a wall all season long. They'll mix it in from time to time just to keep defenses honest, so that those backside ends have to hold on inside zone and that kind of stuff, just for the fear that Josh Allen might keep it or roll out with it and drop a pass on the move, But certainly when push comes to shove, if it's late in games or it's a playoff game, they can jam Josh Allen down the teeth of the defense. He's got speed to keep it on the outside as well. If they want to give him the ball 8 to 10 times a game and run the offense through that, they can do it. They just know they don't want to do that every week. They don't want to get him hurt. So everything is really set up for success here with Josh Allen. That goes without saying. And I think we could even see the best version of Josh Allen, where he's spent the last 2 years kind of restrained in terms of not being able to drive the ball downfield, but he's really learned how to distribute the ball and be that field general. If you get that version perfectly married with some of the 2021, 2022 Josh Allen, where he's able to drive the ball downfield and open things up with someone like DJ Moore here, we could easily see an MVP type of season from Josh Allen. And I mean, we know that he is one of these quarterbacks that you walk into the game and you feel like you got a chance to win just because you have that player. And that is the definition of an elite quarterback. And right now, he gets the crown for me as QB1. Now, if anything were to happen to him, I don't think Kyle Allen is going to step into this situation and perform all that well. So this is probably the team in the league that is hurt the most from a quarterback injury, in my opinion, because the design QB run game falls off. It's not like you even have a mobile threat to at least continue doing that. So the run game takes a big step back. The passing game takes a massive step back. You'd be in trouble with Kyle Allen in there, in my opinion. So that's really the extent, I think, of the quarterback conversation for me. Let's go ahead and move on to the backfield. And I promise I'm not trying to be lazy here, but this is probably a shorter conversation as well. They don't make any changes this offseason. They really didn't need to. This backfield is in excellent hands as long as James Cook is here and he's healthy. I mean, his development here in Buffalo has really become like a best case poster board type of example for a lot of these kind of undersized, more speed-based backs. James Cook was nothing like this coming out of Georgia. He wasn't. He might have been underutilized at Georgia, just as pretty much every player at Georgia is from a pro scouting light. But James Cook currently in the National Football League has some of the best vision in the entire league. When he came into the league, he was bounce happy. He didn't have that patience. He didn't see blocks set up. He has really developed into this player, and it's rare to have a back with his speed, his big play ability that can be a legitimate threat between the tackles. We talked about how this team really wants to beat you up with whether it's gap, inside zone, read options. There are so many small backs in the league that just can't do this, whether they get the ball and they just go full speed ahead and run into the back of their center, or they lack the patience and they try to bounce things outside too often, or outside of the vision, don't have the toughness and pound for pound play strength that James Cook has. Is James Cook the most powerful runner in the NFL? No, of course not. He plays around 200 pounds. But once he gets going full speed, he gets that, force equals mass times acceleration. He gets that speed behind him. It's the same idea of a speed to power rusher, being able to bull rush even if you're 240 pounds. He can run through arm tackles and have contact balance and have an element of power to him, despite he is really a speed-based player. And that all combines to let him be a really nice inside runner. And of course, he can go outside zone, crack toss. That's the easy part of a speed-based back like this. But it's very much the flip side of the TreVeyon Henderson conversation that we had in the Patriots deep dive, where when Henderson comes into the game, you saw defenses spread out a little bit, the ball gets snapped, and everybody's running to one side of the field to prevent those outside runs for a TreVeyon Henderson. It's a predictable run game because nobody was afraid of TreVeyon Henderson picking the right lane and being a good inside runner. Well, people are afraid of James Cook gashing you up the middle and consistently getting those 6-7 yards that are blocked up here in Buffalo. So he's phenomenal. The interesting thing is, he still hasn't really been unlocked as a receiving threat. He's a screen threat, and there's the occasional check down where he'll make a guy miss and get upfield, but he's had some drops throughout his time here. He's not really much of a pass blocker, and because they have these other guys here that they like, we haven't really seen James Cook evolve, in a way that I think it's funny. Like, to me, and I was obviously in the end wrong about my write-up on James Cook because he's just been such a better player than I ever thought he would be. But I thought he would be a pretty good, receiving scat back type of guy. And it's not that he can't do those things, but he's had some deficiencies in those areas as well. And they've kind of, used him like you would think, kind of like Derrick Henry gets used in Baltimore, where it's more like early downs are James Cook. And then on later downs, it's some combination of Ty Johnson and Ray Davis. Again, not that James Cook will never get used on third downs, but that is largely how things play out here. So, to kind of continue that conversation, we can mention Ty Johnson. He is here as the veteran, established, do-it-all third down back presence has done it before, an IQ standpoint, probably their best, most trustworthy pass blocker, picking up the right guy out of the backfield, probably the most refined route runner, the best hands. He will work with Josh Allen and scramble drill in these big moments. Allen will break the pocket and Ty Johnson gets lost over the middle of the field. They love him in that role. And then you have Ray Davis, who's just kind of a nice change-up option to James Cook. And I think Ray Davis has been everything you watched with him at Kentucky and envisioned for him as a mid-round draft pick. You don't need Ray Davis to come in here and take over this backfield and be this overly dynamic star. You want a tough runner that can churn out game. When you're the Bills and you have these blowout games against the Dolphins and the Jets, and you don't want James Cook getting an extra 10 carries and that extra wear and tear on his body, Ray Davis can handle that for you. Get you what you need, fight for some tough yards, churn out the game. If it's a 4th and 1, you might lean towards him over a James Cook, just because he does have a little bit more of that leg drive and ability to get you those yards in that situation. And he gives you, if you've got some excellent, powerful blitzers giving Ty Johnson a hard time with a lot of speed to power ability, Ray Davis can probably step in there and have a little bit more anchor in his pads behind you there. So you really have everything here as long as James Cook is healthy. If James Cook were to get banged up, the dynamism of this backfield disappears immediately. But I think the way they manage his workload is really smart. Keep him healthy, keep him efficient, get the most of these other guys. It's an excellent backfield. They rank top 7 for me in a small tier that ranks 6th to 7th in the NFL. Now, let's go on to the rest of these pass catchers here, the weapons conversation for the Bills. And this is where they did make some quite notable changes from this offseason. So at wide receiver, they definitely upgraded to me. Their losses are very unsubstantial. It was, let's call it what it is, washed up veterans that had to get some snaps here. Gabe Davis, who came back after not sticking in Jacksonville. Brandon Cooks, well on the other side of 30 for him. Curtis Samuel, who just never really worked out as a signing for this team. Like, whatever in terms of losses, honestly. Now, in terms of additions, I've felt like I'm a little bit on an island, like really liking the DJ Moore acquisition. I get it, the sticker shock of like second round pick for DJ Moore, who had a down year last year. There's a sticker shock aspect of that. But for me, it's like, I think DJ Moore's trade value was about a third round pick. And the Bills had a very late second and a very late third. The Bears didn't want to do it for a late third. There might have been some other buyers that came into the picture. I don't know how big of a rush the Bears were in to trade DJ Moore. And the Bills ended up giving their 60th pick in the draft, a late second round pick. And the Bears kicked in a 5th round pick to kind of bridge that gap. I think that's a reasonable trade for the Bills, and I can't really get behind all the hate they've gotten for this. I just think in general, when you see that second round pick sticker, there needs to be a little bit more of a step back of like, okay, but where in the second round was it? They're not sending a top 40 or a top 50 or even a top 55 pick for them. The deeper you go in the second round, the much more closer in terms of being a third round value that they gave up for him. So especially for a team that has been hurting for an outside wide receiver, that felt like in the draft, their chances of that falling to them was pretty low. I like the move, man. And we're going to talk in just a second about why I think DJ Moore is going to be a really good bounce back candidate here in Buffalo as well. But they also did spend a 4th round pick getting some more vertical juice injected into this offense in Skylar Bell as well out of UConn. So definitely upgraded to me at wide receiver, and then no change at tight end. They like that room as they should and staying neutral there. Though they did let Reggie Gilliam at fullback leave. He goes to the Patriots. We talked a little bit about this earlier. They are going to bring in a Ben Van Sumeren, see what he's got there. I'm not going to call this like downgraded to the tight end room. It's more of a shift in focus, I think, but at least needs to be mentioned there as a roster change. Reggie Gilliam is a good fullback for those that want a good fullback. But yes, let's break this group down and get right back into that DJ Moore conversation. I mentioned it. I think he is a massive bounce back candidate here. I do believe that there is a power in being wanted. And I don't want to make full excuses for DJ Moore because it felt to me like he wasn't playing quite as physical. There were definitely some moments where he was not in the right place at the right time. Some of the routes, there was a lacking of an attention to detail from him. There were some frustrating moments. That's not to say there weren't some big moments from DJ Moore with the Bears last year as well. Catches that dagger of a deep touchdown against the Packers, for example, in Chicago. Had his fun moments there, certainly, even last season. But I can look at this and be like, DJ Moore within about a calendar year goes from literally the highest ever paid Chicago Bear to about a year later, Ben Johnson comes in, and Ben Johnson is incredible, right? You guys heard what I said about him in the Bears deep dive, but it definitely felt like Ben Johnson wanted to kind of get his guys going. And the second they took Luther Burden, it was kind of a signal of like, you know, DJ Moore is the old toy that he didn't want to play with anymore. And I think wide receivers get a lot of crap for like that mentality that they want to be the number one. They want their targets. They want to be involved. They want to be the reason the offense wins. It's just how a lot of wide receivers are wired. I understand why you're inclined, like why it's natural to like gravitate towards saying that's selfish and bad. but it can really drive a lot of wide receivers towards success. I mean, look at all the great wide receivers. They're almost all wired that way. And you can see these guys start to check out a little bit and their efficiency drops off. So I don't want this to just be all excuse territory for DJ Moore, but I'm definitely on the side of like, number one, I think he still has juice left in the tank at 29 years old. But number two, of the power of this team believing in him and wanting to funnel their offense through him and getting something closer to, let's say, the 2023 version of DJ Moore, where he was a legitimate top 8 wide receiver in the NFL. And really that definition of a do-it-all true alpha, where he can get open to all 3 levels. The run after catch stuff is where last year I was like, DJ Moore just isn't doing what he had always done, like breaking tackles, making guys miss. We'll see how much is left in the tank in that sense. But I do still think the ability to get open is there, and definitely the ability to like elevate and make these tough catches and be a reliable receiver and that sort of stuff with the ball skills. Just a couple years ago, DJ Moore had the entire package. And if you're worried that it was 2 years ago, I understand it. I do. And that's part of why the yellow arrow is here. There is a chance I'm just wrong. And he's more of a number 2 and isn't that good. And maybe was a slight overpay as a second round pick. But again, in 2024, it was also like not a well-run offense. They had brought in Keenan Allen, which kind of muddied things up. Rome Odunze coming in. There was a smaller pie that needed to be cut into more slices. So for me, DJ Moore still looked good in 2024, but the usage was way down. Anyway, though, I'm buying back into a DJ Moore resurgence here in Buffalo. It's obviously a completely different situation, but I could see some similarities to Stephon Diggs coming in here and just clicking with Josh Allen and that type of connection as a player that the Bills traded for and how much success that brought this offense. Wouldn't be stunned if we get something closer to that than this like worst case scenario where you're looking at it and like, oh my God, I can't believe the Bills gave up the 60th pick for DJ Moore. I'm more excited about that acquisition than I am worried that they overpaid for it. I certainly am. So I like that as a starting point here. It's something that they really just haven't had a do-it-all wide receiver here for a couple of years since Diggs left. But that allows everybody else to really slide back into their natural roles here, right? You got Khalil Shakir. Don't feel the need to spend too much time on Khalil Shakir. He's kind of, copy and paste year to year. What you see is what you get as one of the better slot wide receivers in the NFL. He's going to get you somewhere between 800 and 950 yards. He's got just strong, sticky hands. He can make some guys miss. He's got probably more speed, in my opinion, after the catch than he does within his routes. But he's had to be this team's best wide receiver for a couple of years. He's obviously got his limitations as more of a slot archetype. Well, naturally, he's going to fill back into being a really high-end number 2 slot guy with DJ Moore. The biggest question mark for me, obviously, DJ Moore is a wild card, trying to get some old mojo back here with him. But the other, massive question mark with the wide receivers is, of course, that wide receiver 3 spot. Now, again, you'd much rather this be, well, we've got questions at wide receiver 3, whereas the last couple of years, it's like, these guys have had to kind of step into being this team's number 2 wide receiver. But you kind of got a couple of, let's call it what it is at this point, bad investments in Keon Coleman and Josh Palmer kind of duking it out. Keon Coleman, as of yesterday, listed with the starters. I imagine this is going to be a developing situation. And at the end of the day, I don't know that either of these guys are going to take the wide receiver 3 job. They might ultimately kind of split. But you definitely want to at least give Keon Coleman an opportunity here in what to me is a hot seat season for your former first round pick. He still has talent. I still really like how he could profile as more of a big mashing complementary X, where you've got DJ Moore as your true number 1, move him around type, Khalil Shakir in the slot. You got your tight ends doing your thing. You want that big thumper on the outside to be kind of like a Michael Pittman here. I still think theoretically Keon Coleman could be that, but he's been the opposite of reliable. I think on and off the field, we've seen suspensions for just silly stuff. We've seen drops and frustrating moments. We've seen some high-end catches with his size as well. Frustrating player, right? And who knows what he's going to give you this year. Probably not expecting much from him. And very well could be the case that, okay, they give him a few weeks, get some starts, nothing's clicking. Maybe the off-field kind of, boyishness. What do we want to call it with him? It just becomes a frustration that holds him back, and you just slide Josh Palmer in there. And while I never liked the Josh Palmer signing, I thought he was being overcast as a number 2 and someone that could step in and like be a perimeter, like quality starter for them. And like their big addition that offseason in the wide receiver room, I thought that was a stretch. You also have to acknowledge that he did get hurt last year, and he didn't completely suck when he was out there, but he was Josh Palmer, right? And that's a number 3. So as long as, he's healthy and back to what he was with the Chargers, while this is a question mark in terms of dynamism and it's not going to get you overly excited, I do think him just kind of sliding in, doing some of that stuff we talked about, running some back shoulders, backside digs, being the second, third progression on plays, being a pair of strong hands, a reliable option. You could do worse than that as a floor from your third wide receiver when you also have like receiving entities at tight end and running back too. So I'm not going to say I'm panicked about the wide receiver 3 situation. It's just kind of is what it is to me, barring some surprising Keon Coleman breakout. You do also have Skylar Bell here, and he's exciting. I thought he got drafted a little bit later than I thought he would because he's kind of a Diet Coke version of a DJ Moore, where you watch him at UConn and you're like, all right, this kind of works. Like, he can get open deep, he makes guys miss, he can be effective in the short to intermediate game. He kind of did a little bit of everything and a lot of bit of everything at UConn, where he was the engine of that offense. You're just going to have some questions about his history of drops before this season, making that jump from a UConn to the NFL. How well does that transition go? This was a guy that had to leave Wisconsin to find production at a lower level. There's some stuff, and I don't know how much buzz there is with him in camp. Kind of hitting the ground running here, but definitely some upside as well for him to emerge someday. We'll see what he can do here in his rookie season. Beyond that, Mecole Hardman's here to return kicks. Dante Pettis makes sense as a wide receiver 4. He's sustained his role there as just solid wide receiver depth because he can play inside and out. He's kind of a right place, right time type of receiver, especially as Tyrell Shavers is coming back from an ACL tear, I think in the playoffs last year. So he's going to start the season on the PUP. Shavers is interesting. I think as we talk about Bell and Shavers, you can maybe talk yourself into the idea that you might have a little bit more in this wide receiver 3 room. We haven't seen a ton from Shavers, and obviously there's been opportunities for him to like really grasp this job because he's been around for a couple of years. Actually, more than that, he was in 2023, so this will be his 4th season. So it's pretty unlikely that there's going to be a giant leap. But anytime you're coming in as an undrafted free agent like that, it's going to take you quite some time to really get those targets. And he's earned more and more of a workload here, and then that ACL probably couldn't have come at a worse time for him and his career trajectory. But hey, he's a 6'5" receiver that can make some catches down the field. If you're looking for size and that more X wide receiver mold, there could be something there. But he's got to get back healthy. And that's your wide receiver room. But we do have 3 tight ends, realistically all kind of starters in their own right here inside this offense. And that's exactly why I think we should see a massive uptick in 13 personnel, especially because the fullbacks they're going with to try and make this team extremely unproven, guys like Ben Van Sumeren and rookie Jackson Acker. But all 3 of these guys have a starting role in this offense. Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, and Jackson Hawes. And it's the best way I can describe these guys is if you have a sliding scale of your tight end archetypes. And on one side is the no block, all mismatch receiving style tight end. And on the far other side of that spectrum is basically an extension of your offensive line that doesn't really give you much, if anything, as a receiving entity. Well, you have Jackson Haas in that category as an extension of your offensive lineman who stepped in as a rookie and was quite possibly the best blocking tight end in the NFL, and was a really nice draft take of mine that, like, this was a really nice pick from the Bills last year, and I'm a huge Jackson Haas guy. Obviously, he's not going to play too much of a role in terms of being a pass catcher, but he's in that blocking side of the spectrum. Then you got Dalton Kincaid, who we can have a longer conversation about, but let's wrap up the tight end spectrum analysis here. Dalton Kincaid is very far in that receiving only, no blocking side of things. And then smack dab in the middle of that is Dawson Knox, where he's okay at both. Okay blocker, okay receiver, but not going to get you too excited one way or another. So you can really start to picture how all three of these guys can play into the picture, especially if you're talking about 13 personnel. Okay, Jackson Haas is sticking right next to the tackle, is going to be an ass kicker who can actually like legitimately dig out and pancake block defensive ends, which very few tight ends are capable of. Dawson Knox, probably more off the wing, or if you want to go more of an ace formation where you got two inline tight ends next to tackles, Dawson Knox can hold his own as an inline blocker, can hold his own as a decent enough receiving threat. And then Dalton Kincaid's going to be moving all over the place and try to be that chess piece. So if you're coming out in 13 personnel, the idea is you have to match that in base, because if you come out nickel, the Bills will just shove it down your throat. Well, you come out, you get Kincaid matched up on a linebacker, if you're really good at it, a defensive end, a safety coming down in the box, and that's where Kincaid's really useful. And we can kind of piggyback that into Dalton Kincaid here and what I think of him. I do think last year was the best he's looked on tape, the most reliable hands he's had, the best consistent separation he's gotten, the most just like week in, week out impact. It was like, okay, Dalton Kincaid can play. And there's been moments of drops and frustrations. There was that, moment in the Chiefs, the big Chiefs AFC Championship where the Bills got so close. And, Kincaid just like doesn't quite work back to the ball and like physical his way up for a catch. He's been winning contested catches here. And we've seen Dalton Kincaid last season had more contested catch wins than his two first seasons combined. He had 8 last year and just 7 in his first 2 years. And the contested catch win rate, granted, was pretty good his rookie year. He goes from 33% in 2024 up to 57% last year. So more trustworthy, more physical in the receiving game. The problem is the nickname for him is unfortunately Dalton Band-Aid. He's got to stay on the field, and trusting that to happen, it just is what it is, right? No further analysis needed, but he has missed way too much time to the point that he actually played less snaps by a good amount than these other two tight ends. I mean, Dawson Knox played almost double the amount of snaps that Kincaid did, and even Jackson Haas in his rookie year had almost 200 more snaps than Kincaid. So availability is the best ability, right? Well, it's good to know that he at least has skill and ability on the field. And maybe if he can stay healthy, you would even put the up arrow on Dalton Kincaid, because I do think he played closer to kind of that like Zach Ertz best case scenario pro comp that myself and I'm sure many people had on him coming out. But yeah, he's got to stay on the field. But I'm cautiously optimistic that he's going to be a good impact here, especially if signs are leaning towards them more following that Rams model and leaning more towards 13 personnel, because so many of those Reggie Gilliam snaps would now be going to Dalton Kincaid. Yes, these other tight ends played more snaps than Kincaid because they were healthier, but Kincaid was available in 14 games last year. It wasn't just health, it was formational stuff too, because when they wanted to be more of an I formation, a 21, 22 personnel team, there was less of a spot for Kincaid as opposed to 13 personnel where you're doing that stuff, moving them around and getting more usage out of the guy. And that really concludes your pass catchers. I think we detailed the running backs pretty well already. And you put all that together, and the Bills do come in that tier that is pretty close to the middle of the league, but ranks 18th to 23rd with a B- grade for weapons. You still have some areas where you need guys to stay healthy. You wish you had a little bit more upside with the wide receiver room outside of DJ Moore, and even DJ Moore himself has his question marks, but it is certainly a solid group. I do think a better group than they've had the last couple of years, which isn't saying that much. But if Kincaid can stay healthy and DJ Moore is closer to 2023 DJ Moore, this will climb. This will be more of a top third group of pass catchers in the NFL, which we know with a Josh Allen could absolutely cook. But let's talk about the last unit for the Bills offense, the Bills offensive line. And as far as their offseason changes, they do lose a starter. David Edwards goes and gets a nice lump sum down in New Orleans, so that's a big loss. They also lose Ryan Vandemark, who they wanted to keep, but the Vikings kind of outpriced them in the restricted free agent market. But they did, as they like to do, bring in a couple of, veterans that provide some nice depth here. Lloyd Cushenberry, Austin Corbett. They spent a couple draft picks on day 3 on Jude Bowery and Armaj Reed Adams. But I did say slightly downgraded. They did lose a quality starter there in David Edwards. And as we look at the offensive line, they are counting on very much an unproven commodity to step into those shoes in Alec Anderson, who's been around here. They're very familiar with him. But even with right now a big question at left guard, where David Edwards is departing, this is a top 10 offensive line for me. They actually ranked 8th overall, 11th in run blocking, 6th to 7th in pass blocking. So very respectable ranking still. And obviously, if that left guard situation works itself out, you're going to be sitting pretty here. And this has been a very definitive strength of the Bills. The Lamar Jackson MVP defenders, their biggest case against, people saying Josh Allen has no weapons, blah, blah, blah. Their biggest case is, well, look at that Bills offensive line. And, Ravens fans are right. They have been able to really buy time for Josh Allen and pave the way in the run game. So expecting more of the same here, I would say. A lot of these guys we know what they are. And the conversation doesn't need to be super long there. Like Deion Dawkins is on the other side of 30. He's 32 now, but he's not regressing. He continues to be, I would say, just a pretty consistent top 10 pass protecting left tackle in the NFL. And as an overall left tackle, he kind of flirts with that boundary of top 10, where there's a lot of great left tackles in the NFL. Like, for example, if he was a right tackle, you'd probably lock him in as a top 10 right tackle. There's just more competition if you're ranking left tackles. But the run blocking for him, he's not the best overall athlete, which can hurt his ability to get to spots, sustain blocks at times. He's assignment sound and he's strong. But he's just better as a pass blocker than he is a run blocker, and that's always been the case. He's been kind of a mainstay here. Not kind of. He's totally been a mainstay. And I don't see any reason there's going to be a big fall off there as he gets to 32 years old. We're going to come back to Alec Anderson because he is the question mark at left guard. Let's continue talking about these known starters and get that finished with Connor McGovern has turned into a very quality starting center after he moved from guard to center in 2024. Very trustworthy, athletic, balanced, complete offensive lineman. Is he without his pressures allowed in pass protection? No. Is he the most physically dominant run blocker? No, but he's very good in that phase too. So lock that in at center, bordering on a top 10 center in that regard. At right guard, you do have Osiris Torrance, who they did pay recently. And, I would compare this to the right guard for the Saints, actually, ironically, because David Edwards just went there. But Cesar Ruiz Does he suck? No. Do you want him to be your weakest link in an ideal situation? Yes. And as a highly invested guy, Ruiz was a bottom half of the first round pick. Osiris Torrance was a high second round pick. Or actually, he was more like late second, but that's still a, high investment for a guard, second round pick. But similar in the sense of like, he's technically getting better every year, but it's just like marginal incremental improvements where the pressure rate comes up a little bit. You see a few less blown assignments and gaps in the run game. But overall, like, he might get a tick or two better. They paid him to be a much better player than he's frankly been for them. He does get beat in pass protection. He's got big, clunky feet. The athletes on the inside can work their way around him without too much of a line of resistance. And yeah, play strength can only go so far as a run blocker when you struggle to get out of your stance, you struggle to beat guys to spots, you struggle to keep your feet moving to sustain blocks. It's nice to have big vice grips of hands, but that can only take you so far as a run blocker. So he's fine. I think he's worth about half of what the Bills paid him, but they didn't want to rock the boat too much there, and I can't fault them too much. But it was a price tag where I was like, his agent did a good job. I'll say that. But at least you got Spencer Brown next to him. Spencer Brown is the best player on this offensive line. He is one of the best run blockers in the league, an elite athlete coming out of Northern Iowa that has really put it together, especially in the run game. I will say this, his pass protection has largely been a bit of a roller coaster, I would say. When he first was starting, it was like, oh man, is he good enough to like win this job long term? He was a third round pick, so like he kind of came in and had to earn it and had his struggles, certainly. I believe he was even benched at times. Bills fans can correct me on that if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was. And then he really settled in 2024 as a pass blocker. Looked like the green arrow was like, okay, are we going to talk about like a Jordan Mailata situation where everything is really clicking into place and he's only going to get better in pass protection? Last year, he actually took a step back, and he's a reminder there that progression isn't always linear. But as far as putting a pass blocking grade on Spencer Brown, 2024 and 2025 were so different that I actually put a yellow arrow on him. 77 pass block rating for him last year, probably 3 or 4 marks worse than that. 2024, probably 3 or 4 marks better than that. So what version of a pass blocker do you get in Spencer Brown this year? That is an interesting thing to keep an eye on for this O-line overall. But at the end of the day, you've got a really good right tackle. It just, the pass blocking might ebb and flow a little bit. Now, let's go back to that left guard conversation, which is still a position battle. It is, at this point, looking like Alec Anderson's job to lose, just kind of what I've seen from this. He has played for the Bills, but he has largely played as that 6th offensive lineman when they get into those formations sometimes. And, he was drafted as a tackle, 7th round, I think. Actually undrafted in 2022. So he's hung around. They're familiar with him. He worked his way into the lineup last year in his own unique way. He has started a few games here. He's started both Week 18 games the last 2 years, where the Bills are fortunate that they've been in a position where they can experiment with some guys like this. Looked pretty good in the 2024 start in Week 18. Last year was kicking ass in the run game, but did give up 4 pressures against the Jets in Week 18. He also did start 1 game at right tackle against the Steelers last year, where he also gave up 4 pressures. So the pass blocking, I think, is going to be the question on him. Pretty unknown in terms of what he's going to look like there, but I think it's pretty safe to say, like, he's a pretty good athlete. He's got that dickhead mentality. They used him as an extension of the offensive line as a 6th offensive lineman in packages at times where he has been a road grader for them. So I think they trust his ability there. It's more just like, can he keep Josh Allen upright? And if he really isn't a liability there, that's where you look at Austin Corbett and say, all right, that's a nice signing. I think Corbett brings a nice floor. He's had a lack of durability, so as a backup, that's a pretty nice role, just as a nice Band-Aid to slap on that thing. You could also kick Connor McGovern out to guard, where he's got experience, and put Lloyd Cushenberry in there at center. So they do have a nice floor situation there, a glass in case of emergency setup, where that red graded 65 pass blocking grade that shows up with your starters right now with Alec Anderson, it's like, okay, if they actually get that, they can retreat and put something better in there to salvage that thing. But there's an upside with Alec Anderson if the pass blocking has developed, where he could be yet another one of these guys that has developed really nicely in Buffalo. And I think his upside is probably better than O'Cyrus Torrence at this point. So if Anderson can become a pretty nice player for you, maybe another David Edwards here, I like Torrence settling back in as your worst offensive lineman, where, like I said, you can have an O'Cyrus Torrence on your O-line, and if he's the fifth best player, that's totally reasonable. Do I want to give that guy $19 million a year? No, I don't. But there's a world where they can at least get him into that role here. Now, there's even more fascinating players to talk about here that are more in the developmental category. Tylen Grable is interesting. He has also gotten the opportunity to start both of those Week 18 games the last 2 years. It was kind of a traits-based flyer that this team took a few years ago, and he has held his own in pass pro when he's gotten some limited chances. So he's interesting as a swing tackle. Jude Bowery was a developmental 4th-round pick for this team. I wasn't the biggest fan of Jude Bowery, but I do trust this team's eye for talent there, so we'll see what he can do. Chase Lunt, another developmental athlete. D. Witherspoon is not, unfortunately, Devon Witherspoon, because, boy, this secondary could use that, but an undrafted pickup there. And then I'm also still fascinated in Cedric Van Pran Granger, who was a day 3 pick out of Georgia. I think he has some traits, some upside as a interior offensive lineman. I think they want to continue to see more from him. That's why they signed these other vets on the inside, but still fascinated by what he could turn into someday. And then, Armaj Reed Adams, I'm not betting on him. I mean, talk about what we talked about with O'Cyrus Torrence. Big, strong hands, yes, cannot move his feet to save his life. And he was a problem player for Texas A&M. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's more of a practice squad guy. But yeah, very good offensive line to conclude our offensive conversation on this Bills offense that ranks as my second ranked offense as we head into the year. I'm very high on what these guys are going to get done this year. The fact that I do believe in the DJ Moore addition absolutely helps there. If you're more concerned about DJ Moore, I could understand you looking at this and being like, well, we know they're going to be efficient, but are they explosive? I get that as a critique. I think they're going to be able to open things up a little bit more. I think this run game is going to continue to be top 5. The pass game is going to click. And I think this is with some areas to still go right? Like left guard, this is baking in some potential problems there. I think the coaching can prove to be even higher rated, for example, than I have it. And there's some upside with the weaponry as well. Even if I'm optimistic about the DJ Moore signing, I do bake in the possibility that could go wrong too. So you could hit some green lights there. If Dalton Kincaid can stay healthy, they have some depth pieces there that maybe could make an impact. There's a lot to like with this Bills offense, and I don't think that's really a surprise. But how do you go from the second-ranked offense to the 9th overall team in the power rankings? I think you guys are smart. We got some questions about this defense, as optimistic as I was about the Jim Leonard signing. So let's get into this defensive roster. And we'll start with the defensive line. A lot of movement here, definitely a youth movement here. You've got a lot of veterans on the way out, the biggest of which are going to be D-tackle Daquan Jones, who still played pretty well, but in terms of durability and availability, that's starting to become a growing question for him, so they do not bring him back. Okay, Larry Ogunjobi, Jordan Phillips, kind of whatever, losses there. But Joey Bosa, also you have to remember, okay, he broke down as the season went on. Not to be a dick about it, but I kind of tried to, not that the Bills were listening to me, but I kind of tried to advise against that. Maybe try to keep him more towards the back end of the year instead of blowing your load on week 1 through 8, McDermott. But he did give them a half season of really good edge play last year, so that's a loss in that sense. AJ Epinesa, moderate loss, not the end of the world there, but a lot of known commodities out the door. But there's some additions here to get excited about as well. You have a couple of prominent names coming back from injury, more prominent being Ed Oliver, which was a colossal loss for this defense last year. That's a big return for him. He only played a few games, 11% of their snaps last year. And then another really interesting one here, Landon Jackson coming back, switching to more of a 3-4-N type of role, was essentially hurt all of last year. He got in there for 3% of their snaps, but they kind of get a little extra third-round addition to this team in that sense. They also spent a fifth-round pick on Zane Durant. So I do say upgraded on the interior of the defensive line, as long as that Oliver can stay healthy. But on the edge, I said to be determined because I'm not blown away by their list of additions to counteract really a half a good year of Joey Bosa and AJ Epinesa for what he was. You know, Bradley Chubb, a veteran addition here, familiar with kind of a part of the Denver family, if you will, with this Broncos inspired movement here. TJ Parker in the second round, we'll talk about him. Wasn't my favorite prospect. I see him as a solid addition, but nothing tremendous. And then Mike Dana comes over here after starting for way too long in Kansas City. So more to be determined on the edge. It's not a true downgrade, but hard to call that an upgrade either when we know Joey Bosa played really good football for a good chunk of the season last year. But let's dissect this Bills defensive line. And just to get the rankings out of the way before we talk about the individual players here, because there's a large handful of conversations to be had here, I've got my concerns. They come out as tied for 28th to 29th for my overall defensive line rankings. The pass rush is solid, like 19th to 22nd, B- grade. It's not the end of the world from a pass rushing perspective. Major concerns, though, in terms of D-line run defense. For a run defense that did suck last year. They rank tied for last, 30th to 32nd there, so that does drag down the overall rankings, but it's a little bit split in that sense. But let's start on the edge. You start with Gregory Rousseau, who's a really nice number 2 piece. Excellent run defender. I would probably have to put him in the top 10 for edge run defenders in the NFL. Kind of built in the lab to defend the run, where he's got a high motor, he's got long, strong arms with plenty of pop. I think his awareness against the run is good. Love that. The pass rush has largely stalled out, kind of one of these traits-based guys that hasn't quite taken that next step in terms of learning the art of pass rushing, but he can win with the bull rush. He's got a couple swipe moves that he'll use, which are good enough to get him some wins. And he's a good number 2 pass rushing edge. Being such a great run defender makes him one of the better true number 2 edge players in the league overall, which is good. You're glad you have that, but obviously, I don't think anybody's circling Greg Rousseau and saying that's a 1, and he's the best player in your defensive line. So anytime that's your starting point, you just don't have something that a lot of the best D-lines in the league do have, which is that term that I think we say in every deep dive, that Batman. You are lacking a Batman, and I don't think Greg Rousseau is or ever will be a Batman here at this point, unless something really clicks. But I think he's been this level of player for about 3 to 4 years at this point. Pretty unlikely that another step is coming, though he is only 26 years old. Can at least throw that in there. But yeah, that's your starting point. Then you bring in Bradley Chubb. I get it. Kind of had to happen. It's not like he cost his team a ton. There's some familiarity there. I just have not been the biggest fan of Bradley Chubb's tape for the better part of 2+ years. I couldn't believe that the Dolphins traded a first-round pick for him to then pay him. That just blew my mind. He's a good player. Probably at this point, you want him to be a 3 and someone that you probably want to limit his exposure to reps. And, he's had injuries. But he's a big, strong, heavy-handed run defender. He has technique as a rusher, but that's what's he just doesn't have the get off. He doesn't have a lot of power left in him. He doesn't have any speed to threaten the corner. So tackles can kind of set for him a certain way, and he's got some tricks in his bag. He'll rack up some decent wins, but largely his pressures are coming on the quarterback gets flushed out and he's a contain rusher, or he's looping on a stunt, or he goes unblocked, whatever, or it's a play action scenario where he ends up with a tight end on him. He's not really winning one-on-one pressures, one-on-one pass rush snaps against any quality tackle. So I'd rather he be your 3 and he's your 2. So that's where we're at. Someone you'd rather be a 2 has to be your 1, and someone you'd rather is a 3 has to be your 2. But then you have TJ Parker, who was a second-round pick for this team. But not just that, he was their first pick in this draft. They traded out of the first round and then picked him. And it was kind of a meh moment for me. I think TJ Parker will play in the NFL. I think he can set a hard edge. He's got a long arm bull rush that will play against shorter arm backup tackles or any tackle with a lack of anchor. If you give a starting role to TJ Parker, he'll be an okay player. Kind of like a Bud Dupree, different style, but like what AJ Epinesa was for this team. And in a vacuum, if that guy's drafted like end of the second round, early third round, it's not the end of the world. But the thing is, like, the Bills have been looking for pass rush juice. They have churned these kind of like adequate players in and out, left and right. Depth has never been a problem here in Buffalo. It's finding like impact guys that can get you a bucket on third down, if you will. Just destroy a tackle, get you a quick pressure, be someone that you fear. And I was really shocked, especially after they had already signed Bradley Chubb, really shocked that they didn't go after like a Cassius Howell, especially with this Denver-inspired staff. I made that mock draft pick plenty of times, kind of saying he can do something similar to what Nick Bonito does, give you a little bit more juice and a flamethrower and third down presence. TJ Parker just felt like another one of these, frankly, Brandon Beane picks that really left a lot to be desired to me. He's got a long arm bull rush. He has play strength to his game, but it's not like he tested incredibly. He's a 4.6 40 tester. I don't think he has great speed to like threaten the corner. I don't know, man. I don't think TJ Parker is going to be a bust, but I'd be really surprised if he like breaks out as a rookie or makes a big impact on this defense. I think he's going to be a pretty good like number 3 in an ideal situation. So that's where I'm at on him. We'll see if I'm wrong. But then you do have Michael Hoyt, who it was another one of these like, acquirable number 3 type of edge pieces. It's another example of why I'm against kind of a TJ Parker as early as they went for him. You can find a Michael Hoyt in free agency. It's a lot harder to get more of a twitched up potential impact pass rusher like I think Cassius Howell will be. But anyway, Michael Hoyt, I'm curious to see how they use him in this system because he's always been a fascinating player who's at one point was listed over 300 pounds, but playing off the edge. I think realistically he's played close to like 275, 280 for a few years now. But he's always been on the edge, and he's been in 3-4 systems in the past and stayed as an outside linebacker. But there's a world where maybe they want to use him more hand in the dirt as a 4-eye, kind of their like John Franklin Myers, if you will. I don't really think that's who Hoyt is. I think he's pretty crafty off the edge and strangely athletic for how big he is. Very solid, balanced player. Nice number 3 piece. Should be a nice part of their depth here. You bring in Mike Dana. This is where Mike Dana should have been all along for Kansas City as a 4th or 5th member of your D-line who can, play the run and eat some snaps. Cannot believe how much they've put on his plate in Kansas City all these years. He just doesn't have the dynamism to be much more than this. That's pretty much it on the edge. Javon Solomon does have some twitch and flamethrower ability, if you will. If you're looking for some juice on third down, he would technically be the most like kind of designated pass rush, like speed rush style guy here. I just don't know that he's got enough to make a big impact at the next level in that sense. But then you flip to the interior, and you do have Ed Oliver, right? And he is your best pass rusher. And he, when healthy, is good enough, in my opinion, to be viewed as a Robin, as we describe how these D-lines ideally should be constructed. He's got a lot of stuff to like as a pass rusher, especially when he's on. He's a tough player because he's missed some time, but he also just like is so streaky. He goes on these month stretches and you're like, oh yeah, that's why Ed Oliver was a top 10 pick and is athletically similar to Aaron Donald. He doesn't have the pound for pound play strength at a 280 pound D tackle that Aaron Donald. That's the big divider just from a physical tool standpoint, but there's no doubt Ed Oliver is an elite athlete and human specimen. And when he goes on a run, there's weeks where he's unblockable, and he's had playoff games where he's been a tremendous impact for this team, but then he'll just go and disappear. And it's almost like, this is more of a theory that could probably be disproved, but it's what it feels like to me, at least, is he gets hot, he terrorizes offensive lines, and then maybe opposing offensive lines start to put together a little bit of a game plan for him, especially knowing that Buffalo's never really had that number one that teams have to worry about. So they're able to take him away for a stretch of games, and he kind of disappears, getting double teamed, getting lost in the sauce a little bit more. And then after he disappears for 2 months, he gets more single teams, he gets after it, and repeat the cycle. Again, more of a game theory conversation on him, but he has had a roller coaster career here in Buffalo. But I, at the end of the day, have seen him get off the ball and drive dudes back with a bull rush. I've seen the finesse moves. I've seen the impact he can make. And I think especially in a system that's going to leverage him so much better, in a 3-4 front where he can play 4-eye and get hidden in a way that like a John Franklin Myers can get hidden from a run defense standpoint. I like that, but especially with the way that they've run twists and picks and stunts, leveraging his two-way ability there. Like he can get off the ball and blow up a double team and open things up for someone else, which again, I wish they had a little bit more twitch off the edge, because honestly, none of these edge guys have like great twitch for stunts like Nick Bonito did. So again, cannot believe they didn't go with that more of a style. But anyway, he can be the disruptor, but he can also be the guy that capitalizes on Greg Rousseau coming in, collapsing things, and then Ed Oliver loops around quickly. So I think they'll use him much better. Could even argue for the up arrow on Ed Oliver if you wanted to. But he is undersized from a traditional run defense standpoint, and he has had a lot of struggles throughout his career with his anchor in a traditional sense there. Then you have Deone Walker. I like Deone Walker a lot. He was my guy in last year's draft. It was really fun to see him have success right away. And he was an interesting player in the sense of, I think I had question mark ratings on him last year because it was like, okay, this is either going to work and he'll be impactful right away, or his style is just not going to work. Because he's that dancing bear. Has been one of the more fun draft takes I've had. That was my pro comp on Deone Walker. And I think it was Ed Oliver in camp, like a few months later, said he's a dancing bear. And Ed Oliver, I'm not saying you got that from my channel, but if you're watching this, what's up? But it just is the only way you can use to describe Deone Walker. There's not a ton of technique going on from him, but he has rare contact balance at 6'6". He's 330 pounds, and he's got great agility. So he's able to just kind of stand up and find his way around guys. And typically guys that try that at the NFL level, guys will throw jams into their chest and you'll get knocked back and lose all that momentum. Well, guys throw blocking attempts. They throw jabs and stabs at Deone Walker, but it just doesn't disrupt him because his contact balance is so special. It's the same thing Caleb Banks had that made him a really special prospect. And seeing Deone Walker in the reps he got last year have success as a pass rusher, probably helped Caleb Banks' draft stock a little bit. But now that we've seen that this can translate, and we did with Deone Walker, they slowly leaned into him as the season went on. Started as a rotational player, kind of kept in that rotational role, but then both of the playoff games, he gets over 40 snaps. So when push came to shove and they needed guys to get after the quarterback, they started to lean into Deone Walker. And he was a problem in both those playoff games. There's a lot of upside here. There is. Still a total enigma. Like, I genuinely do not know what his real upside is. Is he going to be kind of this unique matchup problem and a fun chess piece on your D-line that can rush the passer, but maybe isn't going to get you consistently like 4 or 5 pressures a week and do it against everybody because his style is so unique? Or does this continue to grow, and the more and more you put on his plate, the more reps he gets, the more experience he gets, he turns into like this rare pass rushing impact? I genuinely do not know. He is a wild card 100% for this D-line. I think he is the player where the upside is the highest. And this is going to be a really fun year to see kind of where he will land in that discussion. There's definitely like some flaws in his game. Like his pad level definitely comes up. He's not a great run defender. Sometimes his quickness and his size, just the hilarious nature of it, he'll be in the way against the runs. So he's not useless, but he's not a traditional 330-pound nose tackle where he's going to squat down and take on double teams. Like he actually goes backwards quite easily because he just kind of stands up at the snap. It's just his unique style. But yeah, we'll see, man. I think he's either going to be just like a pretty good like third or fourth piece that's just annoying to deal with, and if everything kind of lines into place, you look at some better stars around a Deone Walker, and you also have to deal with a guy that's just this weird matchup problem that some linemen can figure out how to handle and some guys can't. I think that's probably the worst case of what Deone Walker is, which is kind of around where I have him rated right now. Or he's, something closer to like Chris Jones, because Chris Jones uniquely wins with a style like that. I don't know that Walker's quite as explosive as Chris Jones. But something closer to that is like the rare best case scenario here. So he's definitely the wild card aspect of this defensive line that I feel like the rest of it, I've got a pretty good idea of what you're getting. I do think this next guy I'm going to talk about also is a wild card aspect that could be fascinating. You've got a couple of enigmas here with Deone Walker and Landon Jackson. And I don't think Jackson has outrageous upside, but there's a lot of reasons that I'm really intrigued here, and honestly more intrigued in him than TJ Sanders, who was drafted above him in that same draft class. So Jackson was drafted as an edge, super raw, crazy athlete. The type of guy that if last year's edge class was not as good as it was, I think we see Landon Jackson maybe more in like the Malachi Lawrence discussion of like just take the risk on a tradesy guy and see if he figures it out. Jackson kind of just tried a little bit of everything at Arkansas and defended the run really well with his size, but from a pass rush standpoint, nothing ever really stuck consistently. So you just knew he needed to figure a lot of stuff out. So he's already kind of interesting there, but he misses his rookie season for injuries. He only played a few snaps, honestly. And now you have this Denver staff coming in, and they are going to switch him to a 3-4 end, having him bulk up like 20 pounds, closer to the weight he played at in college. And your mind immediately goes to, oh, they think he can be John Franklin Myers, who's a really good player. And I think Landon Jackson could do it. And if he turns into John Franklin Myers, who just has a ton of athleticism, it's for Landon, it's like, does the get off, pop in his hands, bull rush aspect that John Franklin Myers has, can that translate? Now, if he can get that, I think the run defense is reasonable for like that transition, for that role, which isn't going to ask him to eat up double teams and play up to the size of a nose tackle. But I don't know, man. The cards kind of align here where I'm kind of buying into Landon Jackson here. And it could be fun. Him and Deone Walker breaking through, Oliver, Greg Rousseau being what they are. That can be a very practical defensive line. And I think as we start to talk about how things could go right for this defense, where this could be more of a Super Bowl type of team, I think Deone Walker and Landon Jackson here in year 2, those are the guys I'm really circling to kind of give them that hope of getting there. And there might be some Bills fans that are like, what the hell? Why not TJ Sanders? I don't know, man. I don't have the same gut feeling on TJ Sanders. I always was kind of turned off by his tape. I think he's a one-trick pony, which that one trick is okay. He can get off the ball. He's got a bull rush and a swim move. I don't think he really stems moves together. He's egregiously not even undersized. It's just his play strength. He is so weak from a run defense standpoint that I think that kind of drives coaches crazy. And I think he's a true designated pass rusher that can be okay. And there can be a semblance of an up arrow there where he could be a little bit more of an impact. And maybe I'm underselling his upside a little bit. He's just not necessarily a guy I'm betting on as much as like Walker and Jackson. And I'm curious if Bills fans think I'm onto something there or if I'm wrong. But that's really the extent of your intrigue with your interior D-line. You know, Fedarian Mathis has been a draft bust who's also now suspended for the first 3 games of this season. They do draft Zane Durant, who's going to be right in there next to Dwayne Carter from last year's draft. Kind of these undersized athletes that don't really have anything else figured out yet on the D-line. You know, you already have Oliver Jackson, TJ Sanders. How many of these guys do you really need? I don't think you need that many. And that's where it does take me to, like I said, this is the dead last ranked D-line run defense unit in the league. This run defense sucked last year. They finished, I think, 31st in run defense DVOA. I am worried that teams are going to line up and just play smash mouth football, and the Bills just don't have the guys to do anything about it. Your edge is fine, more than fine. But man, you got a 280-pound Ed Oliver, a towering Deone Walker, who's not a good run defender in a traditional sense, hybrid end types, and Fedarian Mathis. I don't think that can work against certain teams that are able to exploit that. And I think it's a big potential problem for this defense. But yeah, it's a long, kind of windy road with this defensive line. There's stuff I like, there's stuff I don't like. It's a wild card unit to see how this all kind of comes together. Another thing we didn't even mention is like Bradley Chubb has kind of been regressing. So where does that down arrow kind of land? Definitely a wild card unit. Definitely a polarizing unit that I think will ultimately be okay at rushing the passer, but the run defense, a major concern. Now, the rest of this defensive roster, it's not as long of a conversation, especially at linebacker. We'll take a look at the unit here in just a second, but I want to show the offseason changes. So some of these veterans out. Shaq Thompson actually played okay for them last year. He's a moderate loss. Matt Milano, he will be missed here, I think, in the locker room, but he has really been a hard watch on the field, so that's a pretty unsubstantial loss at this point. And then the addition is Caleb Elarms-Orr, an athletic developmental day 3 pick there. This is somewhere between slightly downgraded and just neutral for me, depending on what Elarms-Orr is going to be. It's just, okay, losing Shaq Thompson, who played half your snaps last year, is that enough for me to say downgraded? I don't think so. But as we open up the book on these linebackers, it's a concerning group. They rank as my 27th ranked linebacker room in the NFL. C grades across the board for run defense and coverage, right around that 26-ish mark. You got Terrell Bernard, and I think Bills fans are largely on my side at this point. I have been fighting with Bills fans for 3 years at this point that this is an overrated player that I genuinely believe has been kind of the Bills equivalent of like media propaganda, getting fans to buy into the player. I mean, Sean McDermott loved him, and I have no doubt that Terrell Bernard is loved in the locker room, that he's a first one in, last one out mentality guy, that you sit there in the film room and he's pointing things out, and maybe he will be the best linebacker coach in the NFL someday. The problem is he's undersized, he's under athletic, he misses tackles, he gets overwhelmed in the run game, he can't do what his mind is telling him to do, and it shows up constantly on tape. Now, that mind will play at times. You'll see him bait the quarterback at times, and he gets a couple of nice plays a year where you're like, okay, Terrell Bernard, that was pretty nice. But then he goes right back to getting either cooked in coverage or he can't physically match up with someone. And in the run game, it's just constantly being overwhelmed, whether it's trying to get off blocks, trying to finish as a tackler. He's not even a good blitzer because he doesn't have speed to power. He can't get there fast enough. And he has regressed over the last couple of years. He's had some injuries. I think he's on the hot seat. And this is actually a unique situation with the new staff coming in. I actually put both these linebackers on the hot seat for different reasons. But this was McDermott's boy. So he doesn't have that guy in his court, saying we got to start Terrell Bernard. If he's playing like Terrell Bernard has played on the field the last couple of years, I don't think Jim Leonard is going to wait around to put him on the bench. And there's still probably some Bills fans that think I'm crazy, but it's just I have never seen on tape what all these Bills fans keep telling me Terrell Bernard has. I haven't. And then you have Dorian Williams, who I have the yellow arrow on. I don't know where this is going to go with him, and he's a wild card here. Really the definition of your traits-based third, fourth round linebacker prospect, just as Elarm Zor is coming in now, where, okay, there's a lot of flaws on tape, as there are with so many of these young college linebackers. But you knew it was going to take some time. Coming out of Tulane, really, wasn't much in the Bills coaching staff's favor for the first couple of years. Started to get in the lineup, makes some plays, then he makes some mistakes. Has just been, when he's played, it's still been a roller coaster. But I am certainly more patient than I think a lot of people are with prospects like this, where year 4, year 5, year 6, even for these traits-based linebackers coming out that do have instincts and athletic traits, things can really click around this time. So if things mesh well with him and Jim Leonard, there is actually a substantial amount of upside where Dorian Williams has no shortage of the ability to be a starting linebacker and a quality one in the NFL. Loves to hit, flies to the ball. You see little moments where he sees it and it clicks and you're like, all right, we just got to find a way to get that more often. But there's definitely some bad games, and there's a reason the Bills staff that definitely preferred assignment soundness, being in the right place at the right time, not busting stuff. There's a reason they leaned away from a Dorian Williams. But this is a different mentality here with this new staff coming in, and they're gonna love his blitzing. There's a fork in the roads moment for Dorian Williams where things could click. He has all the runway here to have a starting job and have a great breakout season here. Or if he doesn't take another step, if he's missing tackles and gets swallowed up in the run and continues to struggle to see it as a coverage defender as he has, you could see him get benched for a Caleb Elarms or where there's a lot of noise coming out with him. And this was this new defensive staff's kind of pick along with the front office. But it's kind of why both these linebackers are on the hot seat. They have a new, flashy new toy kind of gunning for this job, and neither of these guys have really taken the bull by the horns with this job. So, Elarm Zor played in a 3-3-5 system at TCU. He played some time off the edge. So you think his blitzing will translate. He can run. He can hit. Really unknown in terms of play diagnostics, zone IQ. But they reportedly really like his energy in camp. He was definitely right in line with everything I talk about with third, fourth round linebacker prospects. So if it clicks sooner rather than later, that's great. It would certainly be a little bit of a surprise to me if he's good immediately. But someday it certainly could work out. And if him and Dorian Williams work out well together, there is a lot of upside between the two of them. So not all hope is lost in that sense. It might be a little bit unlikely that everything clicks with the guys they have in place. You do have some other depth that I kind of ignored. Joe Andreessen, Buffalo Joe. Going to be pretty hard for him to win a starting job here. More of a limited athlete type, but I think they like his presence in that locker room. And then you got a bunch of undrafted types trying to vie for spots here as well. But yeah, it's a low-ranking linebacker room. There's no way around it. It's a concern. The lack of consistency in run defense is only going to stack on top of a very questionable defensive line and compound the issue because the picture is going to be muddy for these guys. They don't have clean two-gapping defensive tackles, holding the ground and painting these clear pictures for these linebackers. They're going to be exposed to linemen climbing to the second level and backs screaming at them. Like it's only going to be harder when they don't have the interior D-line support up front. So I'm just not optimistic from that sense, or just, this linebacker room in general could be an area of this defense. We talked about Leonard, and might take a little bit of time to get this whole thing figured out. There might be a move that needs to happen this offseason to kind of complete this room in the future, and hopefully at least one of Williams and Elarm Zor can be a long-term starter for you. But yeah, let's go to the secondary. A lot of turnover here, a lot of familiar names out. They really went with their guys in the secondary last year. This is the definition of what McDermott wanted. He didn't care that, these guys can't move like they used to and are old and have deficiencies. He cared that they knew what they were doing in zone coverage. So Taron Johnson, Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, all were starters for this team last year. They're all gone. Cam Lewis as well went to the Bears. He was more of a dime hybrid back for them. Taylor Rapp, even another one that same deal, can be a total liability in coverage at times, but does he know how to run a split safety defense? That's what they really only cared about there. And now you get a pretty different looking influx of talent. At cornerback, an undersized, volatile D. Alford, an athletic young Davison Igbinosun in the second round, an athletic flyer in Toriano Pride in the 7th round. At safety, they bring in the opposite of Jordan Poyer, an athletic, headhunting, but very boomer bust, non-assignment sound safety in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Okay, they signed Geno Stone for some reason. And then Jalen Kilgore, a very fun, athletic 5th-round pick. So just a very different-looking secondary. At the end of the day, I did still say slightly downgraded at cornerback. Nothing I'm worried about, but Tre'Davious White did actually play pretty well for them in that system. Taron Johnson was okay. It's more just I'm not blown away by these cornerback additions. You could maybe argue for neutral, but yeah, slightly downgraded at corner. At safety, I did say neutral there, but it's definitely different, if nothing else. But let's get into this secondary. And again, I will discuss the rankings of the unit first, and then we'll go player by player. So they do come in that big middle cluster for coverage for the secondary, where it's 15th to 24th. Certainly adequate in a bunch of groups that are a little bit more indistinguishable. But as a tiebreaker with the DB run defense grade, they actually come in tied for last for DB run defense. So that actually pushes them to the bottom of that middling tier, which ends up leaving them as the 24th ranked overall secondary here. But there's definitely a big wild card nature to this secondary as well. So let's try and navigate this. We'll start with their best player and number 1 corner in Christian Benford. Now, I like Christian Benford. He's a good player. They're paying him here. He's a very, very good zone corner. New system, right? They're going to play more bump and run. They're going to play more man coverage. Ideally, this was very much a Sean McDermott kind of guy. And what's interesting, too, is Benford had a down year last year after getting paid. Kind of out of nowhere. He's been so stable. And then last year, he gave up 6 touchdowns credited into his coverage last year. He'd only given up 5 in his first 3 years as a Bill here. The total reception percentage allowed, yards allowed was more stable with what we've seen the rest of his career, but certainly more bad moments from him. So I'm not lowering him for that. Cornerback play is volatile. I'm not going to panic about that necessarily, but it is an interesting note when you combine it with the scheme change. And I was just wondering, how do we want to quantify that in terms of the little icons that I use in these graphics? Because I don't think it's a down arrow. I don't think he's regressing. And he's not a yellow arrow because I don't think he's going to necessarily play better than I have him rated. But I do think he's a wild card in terms of just what is he coming off a down year and in a new system. I largely think he's going to be pretty good. I think he can be like a super Diet Coke version of Patrick Surtain, where the zone stuff's great. He's got good length. Surtain's not like that fast. Neither is Christian Benford. What Surtain is excellent at is being a top-down tackler. I thought that was one of the most underrated cases for him as a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in 2024 was Patrick Surtain. Like, I don't think he missed a single tackle that season. That's where Benford's been really good. I mean, it's not like the Broncos will never run off-zone, top-down stuff. And a lot of it, too, is like, okay, if you're running a cover 3 fire zone, you're playing off coverage with Christian Benford, and the team thinks they can get a quickie on you and get a little run after catch and pick up the first down, trying to force a cornerback to make a tackle. Well, Christian Benford can make that tackle. But yeah, as a man-to-man guy, bump and run, I think he'll take more losses than Pat Surtain, and that's not controversial to say. But I largely think he's going to be pretty good here, but he will be interesting to see how he performs. It wouldn't stun me if he's not as good here, and we're talking about he needs a scheme change, needs to go back to a true like Fangio-style defense. But where the real questions stack up is after him. Maxwell Hairston, talented first-round pick, a ton of speed. There's every reason to believe he can be a good coverage player at the next level. But he got banged up last year, and he has got to get better as a tackler. He's very skinny. He's undersized. He's probably never going to be great at it, but he's got to take that job more seriously. Overall, though, I do think the up arrow is on him. We saw probably more good than bad from him last year. I think there was a lot of flashes from him. It was always kind of a strange fit in a Sean McDermott style defense, because I don't think his like off zone eyes and zone IQ are anything special. But I think in this system, ironically, they had no idea they were going to end up with Jim Leonard. But in this system, he certainly fits better. So I'm excited to see what he can do this year. Certainly unproven, but there's an up arrow there, and former first round pick. Like, there's stuff to like. You go into the slot, and they gave D. Alford the starting job here just from that contract alone. It's not like they gave him a massive bag, 3 years, $15 million, but that's money in this secondary that they're saying you're going to come in and start in the slot. He's started a lot of games in the slot for the Falcons, and because of that, we know what he is. He is lighter. He has instincts. There are moments of him in coverage where if he gets a smaller slot wide receiver, he can hang with him. He can occasionally read the quarterback's eyes and make a good play. The thing is, he's just been so frustrating with the Falcons because in a league where teams are getting bigger in the nickel, right? They know teams are trying to run the ball more. These defenses want to live in nickel to keep matchup advantages on their side in the defense, but they get bigger there because they don't want teams just bullying you up from the slot there as a run fit. And there's been a lot of frustrations with D. Alford, man. Ton of missed tackles, completely. He's like 175 pounds, man. He gets completely overwhelmed in the run game. And I know they had Jaquan McMillan in Denver, who's very similar, undersized, instinctive coverage player, but McMillan, so much better as a tackler. I'm a little scared that this staff saw a lot of similar stuff and was like, oh, he can be our McMillan, but they're underrating the impact that run defense impact could make here. And I just don't know that this signing is going to work out at the end of the day because of that. But they like him. So I think we'll see a good bit of him here. I actually do want to kind of piggyback that conversation, though, and just discuss some of these depth nickel options because there's a handful of them. Honestly, the guy that gets me most excited would be Jalen Kilgore. I had a day 2 grade on Kilgore. I thought this was a great pick for the Bills. Was a player, though, that I'm super fascinated how his NFL team, now the Bills, pinpoints his skill set. And this has been kind of a interesting circle to look at because he replaced or stepped in and broke out after Nicky Manwari left South Carolina, went to the Seahawks. In the draft, I was like, I don't know that Nicky Manwari is a great safety, but I think if you could use him around the box more often, he could be pretty good. And the second the Seahawks drafted him, I was like, oh crap, I'm going to be wrong about Nicky Manwari because they're going to use him like you should. And then Emanwari leaves. South Carolina's like, maybe that's how we should have been using Nick Emanwari. So they take Jalen Kilgore, put him in the slot. He has a million pass breakups. He's flying to the ball. He's not always perfect, but really I thought showed a ton of high-end stuff at a young age, incredible athlete. Yet now we're here in Buffalo and he's listed as a deep safety. And I'm like, hold on, I don't think that's how he should be used. So it's like, how did we do that? Where Emanwari was used the wrong way in college, but the right way at the next level. Now Kilgore, maybe the opposite. Fascinating stuff for the football nerds out there. But yeah, he's listed with the safeties right now. That's a little concerning to me, but Kilgore is the definition of the modern nickel, man. And especially if he can clean up some of the inconsistencies in his coverage stuff and get more consistent as a tackler, he's got so much upside. So we'll see which route they go with him. Maybe he figures it out as a deep safety, but it's just, that's more of a projection. And then you do have Jordan Hancock, who was an interesting nickel defender coming out as well. I think he's passed the eye test when he's been out there. He might have a quicker path to overtaking D. Alford if the missed tackle stuff really becomes a problem there. But you have some options in terms of nickel depth. And even Chauncey Gardner-Johnson has been a better nickel corner than a deep safety. So if you wanted to go that route, that could maybe be an option. But I don't know that that's necessarily what they want to do there. But then you do have your outside corner depth, which is pretty thin. I mean, Davison Igbinosun was a grabby press man corner coming out of Ohio State, a penalty machine, doesn't really have much in terms of zone eyes, zone IQ. You got to coach that up, but largely, like, you think he can play man coverage at the next level to a decent degree, knowing he's probably going to get flagged a decent amount. You know, I had a 3rd round grade on him. They take him at the end of the 2nd, that kind of deal. Like, we'll see how he works out. I don't think it was a horrible pick, but certainly had his flaws. Toriano Pride's just a, draft speed and see what happens. He ran like a 4.3 or something. And then I did notice on at least our lads, as Connie Walker listed as an immediate backup. And I'm very unfamiliar with his game. He played his final year at Arkansas, but I can definitely understand that, there's opportunities for an outside corner to stand out here, because after Igbinosun, it's like there's really nobody from an outside cornerback perspective that's going to stop an undrafted free agent from taking another roster spot. So maybe there's something there, or maybe it's just the best of the worst scenario. But then you go to safety, and I do like Cole Bishop. Year 1 was bad. Year 2 was up and down with a lot of high-end flashes. It looked like the first half of the year something really clicked. Second half of the year, the missed tackles came back, and you had some more question marks. So he played a lot of slot corner at Utah. I see a guy that definitely is starting to figure things out, but it's more of a trial by fire situation. I'm a believer. We'll see how he handles the new system. I think he can be more of a deep safety type of guy for them, but that slot corner experience is nice, and he can definitely man guys up if they want to bring him down and play cover zero and that kind of stuff. So that's nice. It's not a coincidence that both these guys have the ability to play man coverage for a team that ideally wants to be cover 1 and cover 0, at times. But yeah, I think you kind of drop Cole Bishop in there with the Maxwell Harrison conversation of like, all right, there's upside there, but we've seen, some moments of a lower floor there as well. And then, yeah, let's just drop the volatile Chauncey Gardner-Johnson on top of this. He is kind of just like a play-by-play random button for your defense. Maybe I'll make another Call of Duty reference for the second week in a row here and compare him to like the mystery box in Zombies. Every play, you got to roll the dice a little bit. You're going to get some awesome reads, some explosive plays against screens, and as a run defender, some really good moments. You're also going to get a ton of missed tackles. You're going to get him gambling and busting coverages. He is a roller coaster, volatile starting safety, and even from like a off-field and on-field trash-talking perspective, like there's a reason he is not stuck anywhere. He is not necessarily, I think it's probably reasonable to say, like everybody's favorite teammate. And it kind of depends on the locker room a little bit. But it's also weird that like the Texans didn't like him, because that seems like he'd be their type, just this trash-talking, go for it mindset, and he didn't even fit in there. So I don't know that he'll start all year. I don't know where this goes with him, but he's here and he is what he is overall. But on a play-by-play basis, you have no idea what that is. You got Damar Hamlin. Awesome story. If you're realistic about the tape, he's a special teamer and a limited coverage safety. Geno Stone, man, that 2023 season in Baltimore where a bunch of picks fell in his lap are doing a lot of heavy lifting here, dude. I don't see a rosterable safety based on his last 2 years of tape. Maybe the coverage stuff comes back, but I don't even know how much of that was great tape. A lot of it was just interceptions being in his opportune window, if you will. You got Sam Franklin. He's kind of a hybrid journeyman at this point, can do a little bit of everything, but nothing. Jack of all trades, master of none type. And that rounds out your secondary. So you look at this defense overall, and it's a whirlwind, right? There's some areas where you can squint and see, all right, interior D-line, couple pieces of the secondary come together, maybe one of these linebackers click. You're looking for building blocks for the future, and ideally you're looking for guys that by the end of the season can make a big impact for you. So there's players here that can do that for them. But there's a lot of kind of random miscellaneous ingredients that you're kind of throwing into this stew. It might not look pretty in year one, and Leonard might be a year away, like his mentor and Vance Joseph took a little bit in Denver. So we'll have to just see where this goes. But they do come into the year ranked as my 27th ranked defense, 31st in run defense, which to be fair is about where they were last year. 24th in pass defense is a little bit more to work with in that sense. But yeah, they're going to have to figure it out on this side of the ball, needless to say. Now let's look at some special teams. So they do get their kicker, Tyler Bass, back. They also drafted a punter in the 7th round to compete with Mitch Wishnowsky here. I ultimately did say neutral, though, because it's not like Matt Prater was bad last year. In fact, was probably a little better than Tyler Bass has been for them at times. And pretty unknown with the punter, but they're got some moving pieces with the special teams. They come out as my 21st ranked special teams by the formula, which projecting special teams is always volatile and unstable. I think in this case, that's pretty applicable. They also changed special teams coordinator. They got a lot of moving pieces in terms of guys that would be covering kicks. So like you look at the fact that they graded out pretty well in terms of team success with PFF team grade, the DVOA team grade, 9th and 16th respectively. You're baking in the overall team coach and culture grade here that I give these teams as well, which with McDermott leaving is going to be a, variable. Overall, though, like the specialists are largely okay with Bass in this punter competition. Should emerge with a pretty decent punter and a pretty decent kicker. I like their kick returner a lot in Ray Davis. Had some really good moments last year. Mecole Hardman's an okay punt returner. So you don't have like question marks necessarily, but 21st is how they came out in the ranking, and we'll see where it all lands. So there is your full picture on the Buffalo Bills. Again, our 9th ranked overall team, but a massive split. This might be our biggest split out of all these teams. 2nd on offense, 27th on defense. The Bengals might have had a larger split. I'd have to go back and check, but pretty drastic in that sense. But let's get into our full recap here before I take a look at this team schedule and give you my actual stand my ground prediction on what I think happens here with the Bills. So we'll open up my Venn diagram of strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors. And you do have the same definitive strengths you've had. Quarterback, running back, offensive line. They have been the main engine of this Bills team. And I think you can hang your hat on that again. And it has gotten them very far the last couple of years. But you have a large list of wild cards, mostly related to the defense, but you have to look at that group of weapons as a pivotal factor for this offense, mostly between DJ Moore and what version of him he is and the health of Dalton Kincaid, I think that's going to define the success of the upside of their passing game. I think there's a ton of upside if you hit your green lights there. If Kincaid gets hurt and DJ Moore continues to regress, you might hit some roadblocks and be a little bit more capped as an offense. And then you've got the kind of Joe Brady factor as well. We've talked about some aspects of his play calling that I think he has room for improvement. More 13 personnel would be great, pushing the ball downfield a little bit more, but also the wild card as well as a head coach. How does he balance being the head coach of the team, a very young coach still, while also trying to be this great play caller as well? So that's definitely a wild card with his promotion to head coach. And then it's pretty much everything related to the defense after that. D-line, linebackers, secondary, defensive coaching. We're not going to go back through all of it, but it's all a whirlwind right now. We'll see how it all kind of lands. I do see some definitive weaknesses right now, and it's honestly just everything related to their run defense, which ranked 31st for me heading into the year. The interior D-line, the questions at linebacker, and the lack of DB run support. It could be a disaster for the Bills' run defense this season if they can't get some things to go right, and if Jim Leonard can't do a great job to navigate that thing and elevate their run defense. But now let's take a look at this Bills schedule and ultimately give my own actual wins prediction for the Bills here. So this is a hard schedule. It is. They do have their gimmies in their division, which honestly, looking at this, I'm not going to say they have to go 4-0 against Miami and the Jets, but they might have to, because the rest of their games, other than one game at the Raiders, week 6, I think that's 5 wins right there. But other than that, it is going to be a week in, week out grind for this team. Every single remaining game is against a playoff contender. 6 games against teams that I haven't even ranked in this series yet. And 11 games against teams that I ranked inside the top 14 in this series, which would be technically your playoff teams. So in what's going to be a bit of a transition season, I would prefer that they had a few more gimmies than this. And I would also prefer that you got at least one of those Miami or Jets games in the first half of the season, because when I think about this Bills team, I do think it's going to take a while for this defense to figure things out. Like, we don't need to keep beating a dead horse here, but there's a lot of moving pieces. It could take some time for them to figure things out on that side of the ball. And you don't get much time to like breathe here. You start with Houston, Detroit, the Chargers, New England, and the Rams. I would so much rather get those 5 teams in the last 2 months of the season than out the gate. So I think that's going to work against them from a schedule perspective. I do think after that week 7 bye and beyond, this is going to be I think things are going to start to shape up for them, and they can start whipping things into place and beating some of these, more playoff caliber teams. But if this team starts 2-4, I'm not going to be stunned. So for me, I said the floor was 9 wins and the ceiling was 11 wins. And there's a certain former head coach that's going to look at that and like that math there. And then my prediction landed right in the middle there with a 10-win season for the Bills. At the end of the day, this is a Josh Allen offense that should cook. But as we know, you get into a bunch of shootouts and anything can go wrong. That margin for error starts to shrink. Crazy things can happen in the NFL. So I think this team's going to have their ups and downs throughout the season, but could they get in, whether that is as a division winner or as a wild card, and feel like a really dangerous team if the defense starts to, figure out where they need to line up their chess pieces and figure things out as they get into the season? Absolutely. Like they could be a really dangerous season come season end, but they clearly have their question marks as we head into the year. I do think them being tied for second in Super Bowl odds is a little bit crazy given all the defensive questions, but bettors love good quarterbacks. I understand that. And again, I do think the upside is there for it to click by the end of the year. Let's finish up with my superlative award winners. And there's some fun picks here. So for team MVP, I'm going to plant the flag on DJ Moore. Now, obviously, we're not picking quarterbacks for this award. It should be Josh Allen. He might win the real MVP. But yeah, I think this is going to look back as a success. I think he's going to open things up for the offense and be really good. And because of that, he actually shows up as my fantasy MVP as well. And just a quick plug, I do have my 2026 fantasy redraft rankings available in the superstar tier of my Patreon out there. But you can see where my rank is compared to consensus in there, and I'm 7 spots higher on DJ Moore. He's my 17th ranked wide receiver, and consensus rankings have him at 24th. So I see a ton of value in him inside this offense. But back to the biggest wild card, it's all the defense. And I think at the end of the day, the biggest part of that is going to be Jim Leonard. But there are different pieces here that you could definitely bake in. Like Deone Walker, for example, was in consideration for me. But I do think the impact that the coach can have on the entire unit, if this is a slam dunk hire, would lead to the biggest impact as a question mark for this team's season. Breakout offense, I'm going to buy the Alec Anderson thing. I think this Bills staff and offensive line development deserves a lot of benefit of the doubt. I've liked the run blocking stuff. He just needs to be an okay pass blocker. And if that's the case, he can be a pretty good guard and start to, put his name on the map as like a quality guard in the NFL. Breakout defense, I'm kind of buying the Landon Jackson thing. It kind of feels like cheating because it's kind of his rookie season after hardly playing last year, but he is technically eligible for me here where I don't do rookies. I just love the connection between him kind of being a John Franklin Myers type of guy here, and I can see it working. Unsung hero, I said Khalil Shakir because the Bills offense gets a lot of crap for the amount of crossing routes and screens and run after catch stuff that they lean into, and there's times where that can be frustrating, but there's also like 5 times over where that's really frustrating for the defense, that Khalil Shakir is just going to consistently make tough catches over the middle of the field and sometimes make guys miss, catching the ball short of the sticks and get the first down or set up a 4th and inches where you can run a QB power with Josh Allen. Khalil Shakir is never going to be at the top of anybody's, top 20 even wide receiver rankings, but he's really freaking good and valuable here. So he was a nice choice for unsung hero. And those are my 6 superlative awards for the Buffalo Bills, and thus does conclude my Bills deep dive. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know, Bills fans, in the comments down below if you think I missed anything, especially trying to navigate the whirlwind of all the moving pieces of this defense. But let me know as well who you think comes next with the number 8 spot in these power rankings. Please do hit that like button on the way out if you're an audio listener of the Fully Inflated Football Podcast. Listening to that audio version of this show, please do leave a review as well. I really do appreciate it. But that is all I got. Thank you so much for watching. Bills fans, good luck this year, and I'll see you guys soon. Cheers.